Perlmutter is one of the Western world's leading pioneers in the introduction of meditation into the cultural firmament, having founded the American Meditation Institute in Averill Park, New York, in 1996. Their courses are now approved and accredited by the American Medical Association and the American Nurses Association. He also serves as the author and editor of Transformation, the Journal of Meditation as Mind, Body, Medicine. However, today he's going to talk about his book, The Heart and Science of Yoga, the American Meditation Institute's empowering self care program for a happy, healthy, joyful life, which is an encyclopedic guide to meditation and the yoga science that lies behind it. This book has been praised by medical luminaries and amazing people such as Dr. Dean Hornish, Mehmet Oz, Larry Dossey, and is regarded as the most acceptable source of knowledge about adapting the 8 steps of yoga science, including meditation, into a busy and stress filled life so you can reach a new level of peace, contentment, well being, and achievement. And since joyful living and living regret free is what we're here to talk about, Leonard, I am just delighted that you're with us today. So, how are you?
I am very well. Thank you, Gail. I really appreciate the invitation. It's very kind.
Well, you say that yoga is a science. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, even though most people, when they hear the word yoga, they think of physical postures, exercises, yoga is essentially a science. It's thousands of years old. It dates back 6,000 years old. And it's a science because it creates a template for each individual to experiment with the truth. Yoga, which means union, is really seen on a practical level as a metaphoric bridge in our lives. It acts as a philosophy of life, if you will, that encourages us in every relationship to base our outer actions on our own inner wisdom. And when we talk about outer actions, of course, we're talking not only physical actions, but verbal actions, as well as mental actions, because even a thought is a veritable action. And the hypothesis of this science is the more regularly we can base our thoughts, our words, and our actions on our own inner wisdom, that is the superconscious portion of the mind, then the consequence will lead to increasing happiness, health, and security. So the superconscious portion of the mind is a foreign-sounding concept to most Americans. We've heard of the conscious mind, certainly, and the unconscious mind, but the superconscious mind is something that I never remember learning about in school or college or university.
I don't either. That's something that I have not heard about before. And you also talk about something about the bridge of yoga. Does that come in there because of that?
The bridge of yoga asks us to access the superconscious portion of the mind by one of the mind's most important functions, and that is our conscience. Now, the conscience is a very interesting function of the mind. The conscience is what separates human beings from other animals. The conscience acts as a mirror. It has a reflective functionality. The conscience alone in the human being can reflect perfect wisdom from the superconscious portion of the mind. Now, the superconscious portion of the mind is not as mysterious as we might think. It's the same portion of the mind where Albert Einstein saw mathematical equations. It's the same portion of the mind where Paul McCartney hears beautiful melodies. Doesn't mean that I'm going to become a songwriter. It doesn't mean, Gail, that you're going to become a physicist. What it does mean, and this is the hypothesis of yoga as a science, the hypothesis is if you and I can use our conscience to access this superconscious wisdom that will tell us 24/7 the thought to think, the word to speak, and the action to take in every single relationship that we have, the idea is that the consequence that develops from those thoughts, words, and actions will enable us to fulfill the purpose of our lives without pain, without misery, and without bondage. Of course, the opposite is true. The corollary to all that is that if we don't have a philosophy of life, if we don't have a bridge of yoga, regardless of what we call it, you could call it the bridge of Christianity, you could call it the bridge of Judaism, because they're all based on yoga science. Same with Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam. But if we don't have a philosophy of life that encourages us to base our outer actions on our inner wisdom, then a lot of our outer actions are going to actually conflict with our inner wisdom. And inner conflict becomes the mother of all problems. If we have inner conflict, we have to have outer conflict. It's reflected outside of us. And the first experience that we have, the first relationship that we have that is so-called outside the mind is the body. And therefore, oh, I have a pain in my back. Oh, I have high blood pressure. If we can eliminate the inner conflict in the mind, it's not necessary for the body to be in pain. And that's the science of yoga. And every relationship that we have requires an action. And we know from Newton's third law of motion, every time there's an action, there's a consequence. So
it's interesting, though, because I have heard so many people say that meditation has just changed their lives. It has just transformed them. And I've seen examples of jailed prisoners who have taken up meditation and totally changed how they think and who they are. But I'm not sure that people really understand how it works. So how does meditation reduce and eliminate stress and burnout and illness?
Well, meditation does something that nothing else can do. It introduces you to yourself. The major problem that all human beings have is that we carry with us in our unconscious mind concepts that are not true. When I was a child in grade school in Albany, New York, I learned that...
Oh, you've got to be kidding, Leonard. Do you know that's my hometown?
Is that right?
My hometown is Albany, New York. I went to Albany High School. I graduated.
So did I.
Oh, my gosh. My dad went there. My sister went there. So we've got something in common. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but nobody I know is from Albany. So that's amazing. Okay, go ahead.
So meditation introduces us to ourselves. Most human beings have these faulty concepts. We learned in grade school that 1 + 2 is 3, obviously, but to be very honest with you, I've had teachers in my life that taught me that 1 + 2 is 4. And I was so vulnerable and so impressionable at the time, I believed them. And I now have that concept stored in my unconscious mind that 1 + 2 in certain kinds of situations equals 4. And don't you know that every time I use that concept that is not true, I hurt myself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Really? So if you're harboring false thoughts, they can do you harm.
Yes, our conceptions skew our perceptions. We don't experience the world. We really experience our own mind. We see what we know. There's a great little baseball story about 3 umpires. They're having a conversation about what constitutes a ball and a strike. And the first umpire, who's a rookie, says, "I call them as I see them." And the second umpire, who's been calling balls and strikes in the major leagues for about 10 years, says, "I call them as they are." And the third umpire, who's been around, he's an old pro, he's been around for about 25 years. He looks at both the others and he's shaking his head and he says, "No. They are what I call them." And so that's the way we go through life. We see what we know. Our concepts skew our perception. And so what meditation does is it helps us to examine concepts that are faulty. And and let them go and create new, healthy, truthful concepts that can lead us to the summum bonum of life.
So, how does your book tie into all of this? I mean, you've got some really high level people like Dr. Ornish and Dr. Oz saying this is great stuff. So, what tell us about your book and the approach it takes, which other books on yoga may not have taken, and what is so unusual about what you've written?
I think what's unusual is that it recognizes that as human beings, we have a lot of different kinds of relationships. We have a relationship with the body, we have a relationship with our thoughts, we have a relationship with our desires, with our emotions, with our concepts, with our husband, with our wife, with our children, with our partner, with our mother, with our father, with the President of the United States. We're very complicated animals. And so what the Heart and Science of Yoga book does, it acknowledges that we have a lot of different fields of action, if you will, upon which we are asked to act, which will bring about consequences. So I assume, like myself, most people want to be happy. They want to be healthy, and they want to be secure. They want loving, nurturing, creative relationships in their lives. The question then becomes, how are we going to get to point B from point A? If the issue were, I want to start a business, well, the first thing I do, I'd sit down and I'd write a business plan. Then I'd contact maybe 2 or 3 banks to see if I can receive some financing. Maybe I do a little survey and ask people if they even want or need my service or my product. So if we want to be happy and we want to be healthy and we want to be secure, how is it that we're going to get to point B from point A? And that's the answer of yoga science. Yoga science tells us that we are the architects of our lives. We determine our destiny. If we want to be happy, if we want to be healthy, and if we want to be secure, that means in all these various relationships, we need to create a metaphoric bridge, the bridge of yoga, that will encourage us, that inspires us, that instructs us to base our outer action on our inner wisdom, so that the consequence that develops will lead us closer and closer to that deepest driving desire.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about how complicated we are, because I've always kind of considered myself not so complicated. I mean, I have found that when I dialogue with people and I interact with people, and I certainly meet hundreds, if not thousands of people in all the things that I do, I'm always amazed how complicated people make everything. And I approach things so simply, and I guess it comes from my upbringing. I was just taught whatever happens to you, you face it, you solve it, and you go on. And accountability was very big in my family. And whatever happened, good or bad, I had to take responsibility for it and deal with it. And I find that very simple. And so it's interesting that many people make big deals out of very small things. And I just wonder your opinion of that, because I really consider things pretty simple. I may not like them, but I have to deal with them.
Well, I think that you're absolutely 100% correct in both aspects. I think that simple is correct, and yet human beings complicate things.
That's true. I will agree with you there.
And so really, if you examine the issue, the problem really is the mind, and yet the mind is the solution. So that's why yoga science asks us to give our attention to our thought patterns, what we're thinking, because what we think becomes what we say, and what we think becomes what we do, and those words and those actions lead us in certain directions. Certain consequences develop. So, it's interesting that every single thought that comes into our awareness is only a suggestion. It's not an imperial command, and yet